Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, hope you're doing well. Okay, let's do a quick recap of week 8 of the marathon train so far. Week 8 is also the second week of the 5-week lactate threshold and June's train block. So Monday was just 10 kilometers of recovery on grass. I'm really liking the 1k loop around both grass fields rather than just a single one. Yeah, I felt pretty decent here. Tuesday was supposed to be a 14 kilometer general aerobic run, but I ended up going to the athletics track at Sydney Park in the evening with OPRC and some other filler runs as well. I haven't done a workout on the track since the first time I did last year in early August at the crest at Bass Hill during the Sydney Marathon train block, so it's been a good long while now. I think the planned session was something like 4 sets of 1 kilometer effort, 200 meter recovery, 400 meter effort, and then 2 minutes recovery. I think the recoveries are either a slow jog or walk, but I think I ended up walking for most of it. I tried to take it fairly chill and not go too hard, but I still end up all over the place, so I didn't really complete the entire workout properly as planned, but yeah, it should be fine. Overall, it's pretty fun to run on the track with the group as well. Wednesday was supposed to be a 24 kilometer medium long run, but I ended up just doing like 21 kilometers instead. The track workout from the evening before kind of made me a bit tired by next morning, but overall the run went okay as usual. Thursday was 10 kilometers of recovery on grass. Honestly, the program does say to do like 11 Ks, but I'm just so used to 10 Ks now, so yeah, I think it should be okay. Friday was a 10 kilometer threshold run, supposed to be around 19 Ks in total, including the warm up and cool down as well. This time I wore my Endorphin Pro Freeze with like thinner socks and slightly looser lacing, like with the lock laces. It felt slightly roomier and a bit more comfy, but the ride was also less stable overall, as in my feet were like sliding around in the shoe a little bit, so it's like the shoes felt a bit wobbly when I was running, and I still end up getting numb toes a fair bit. Anyways, the run went fairly well overall on paper, but next time I'll try changing lace style a tiny bit and see how it goes. Saturday was some recovery at Rhodes Parkrun. I ran most of it with Colin. Colin's home park run, or at least his local one, is actually Wildflower Park Run, but sometimes he'll swing by Rhodes. Not often though, so it was nice to catch up with him this time. I think he sped up for the last kilometer or so, and I was kind of caught by surprise. And then finally Sunday was a 35 kilometer long run. This time I wore my new white pair of speeds with like thinner socks, but I forgot to apply the single helix lacing technique that I was meant to do. So yeah, of course I ended up getting like numb toes again after like around 24 Ks in. I chose a big route as well, so it was from my place to George's Hall, Lake Gillawana and Lansdowne, then all the way to Canley Vale, where I head onto the Parramatta Liverpool Rail Trail, all the way to Parramatta, and then head to Rhodes via the Parramatta Valley Cycleway. It was a pretty nice and cool morning, but I didn't realise how sunny it was until I reached Canley Vale. In my mind, when I go from Canley Vale to Parramatta, it always feels like it's heading from the south to north direction, but it's actually from the southwest to northeast direction. So yeah, the sunlight was pretty direct on my face that morning. However, I did try running a bit taller this time. Usually when it's sunny outside, but the sun's kind of like low and not exactly overhead, so like early in the mornings, I sort of hunch a bit as to get a bit more shade from the sunlight with my hat, but I realized doing this kind of like hurts my running form a bit, so yeah, this time I just try to like stay upright for the most part and felt much stronger overall. And then once I reached Parramatta, which is about the 24-25k mark, there was about 10 to 11 Ks left before I reached Rhodes, and I already had pretty bad numb toes at that point, so I figured, you know what, might as well just try to speed up a little bit, get used to managing the discomfort and just see how it goes. It was pretty uncomfortable of course, but what I do is I just shift my toes a little bit every now and then, kind of like resetting the pain. I mean, the pain doesn't really go away, but by doing that it doesn't get too crazy at least. I ended up finishing fairly strongly somehow, and also met up with OPRC just after they finished the long run as well, so yeah, that was great. Anyways, the thin socks helped a bit, but not enough, so I really need to apply the single helix lacing soon and see how it goes. Anyways, the total march for week 8 was about 114 kilometers. It was another big week for me, but still fairly manageable for the most part. Next week there'll be a marathon pace long run, so hopefully by then I'll have dialed the lacing in a bit better, and yeah, I'm keen to see how it goes. Anyways, I felt like talking a bit about how I discover and plan my running routes. So when I first got into this whole running thing, it was on the treadmill in the gym, then eventually I ran outside. It was on some pavement around the local oval. It was Bankstown Oval. It was pretty convenient since it's about like a 5-minute jog from a place. Sometimes I'd also run around the local streets, but really most of it was around that single oval. Then I started to run around Devil Park on some netball courts, which was about 50 minutes jog away from my place. As I got a bit fitter and more confident, I started to check out Lake Gillawana in Lansdowne, and then sometime later I got around to Sydney Lynn Park. Nowadays I usually do most of my runs around my local area for convenience, especially around Riverwood, but when it comes to like Sunday long runs for example, I'll occasionally explore some like long routes to see what's out there and like keep things a bit interesting. So some of my favorite places to run that I've discovered over the years include Sydney Lynn Park and Bicentennial Park. There's like really flat and wide footpaths, many routes to explore, and there's even like 2 park runs around there. There's also the Parramatta Valley Cycleway. It's about a 10 kilometer cycleway that goes from Rhodes and Meadowbank all the way to Parramatta. There's also Cooks River, which is about like a 15k shared cycleway that goes from like Stratford all the way to like Tempe and Wallow Creek. There's also M5 Linear Park, which is about like a 3.5k shared cycleway that goes from like Beverly Hills all the way to like Bexley North. There's the Parramatta Liverpool Rail Trail. It's another cycleway that runs along the train lines, goes for about 15 kilometers, but you can extend it further to Glenfield and beyond, so maybe about 22 kilometers or even more. There's also Prospect Creek and Prospect Canal. It's about an 18k cycleway loop around Smithfield and Guildford West along the creek and canal. There's also Parramatta to Carlingford Light Rail. It's about 5 kilometers on shared footpath one way, gradually uphill from the new light rail station Tramway Avenue all the way to like Carlingford. There's also Parramatta Park. It's about a 3.2 kilometer loop on road and shared footpath, all like a massive park. There's also the Bay Run. That's about a 7k loop on shared footpath around the Iron Cove. And there's heaps of other routes as well. Most of it is along shared footpaths and cycle cycleways, and I haven't really gotten around to like exploring trails that much. I mean, I've done a bunch of hikes on trails, but I haven't really run on them that much. Also, most of the time I'm happy to just like run to where I want to go, but sometimes I'll drive or even like take public transport to get there as well. So how did I end up discovering and plan these routes anyway? There's a bunch of ways. The first one is simply just coming across it. Like for example, local streets, parks, reserves, and so on. I found out about the local parks and ovals around my area from just like doing morning and evening walks in the past. There's also some areas where I might have seen or come across while driving, such as like Lake Gilawana, for example, whenever I went along Henry Lawson Drive. And then we have Google Maps. If you go to Google Maps and then go to the layers section and then select the cycling mode, there's now like a bunch of green lines on the map that shows you bicycle-friendly routes and also bike paths. The dark green routes indicate dedicated bicycle routes, and then the light green routes indicate streets with like dedicated bike lanes, and then the dash routes indicate streets or paths that are otherwise recommended for bicycle usage. I discovered lots of my routes this way, but keep in mind that one, I'm not too sure about the etiquette regarding running on cycleways, but most of the time it's a shared footpath in my experience, so it's probably okay as long as we all stay alert, keep left or right depending on which country I guess, give way and so on. And then 2, the bike route data isn't always correct with Google Maps. Sometimes what indicates that is a bike path is actually more open to interpretation or just flat out wrong, or even like unsafe to run on. And other times it's actually like a full-blown trail. The reliability often depends on the location, and I'm not too sure where to get the data from. Some of it is likely crowdsourced, and maybe some of it is even through other like sneaky ways, but I'm not even sure how they validate the routes. As a general user, you're able to submit edits and corrections, but they don't always go through, and sometimes they apply incorrectly. City councils are able to submit the data through the Google Maps Content Partners program as well. The Google Maps cycling data isn't perfect or too reliable, but I just treat it as general suggestions. Most of the time it's been good enough in my experience, but again, it might vary wildly depending on like the location. There's some other mapping alternatives that I've come across, and although some of them might be a bit cycling oriented, I feel like they can still be quite relevant or useful to runners. So those alternatives include OSM, which stands for OpenStreetMap. It's basically an alternative to Google Maps, and it also features like bike infrastructure data. There's also Cycle OSM, so that also uses OSM and is a bit more dedicated to cycling. There's also Commute, so that's an app that uses OSM as well and like provides navigation and route planning in general. And there's also Osman, that's also another app that uses OSM and provides navigation route planning as well. And there's many others. I haven't really used those maps or apps too much, but I might check them out a bit more later on, especially if I ever get into cycling. But again, it's probably still very useful for running as well. And then we have Garmin Connect. I personally own a Garmin watch, so I've explored a bit of the Garmin Connect platform. So if you go to the training section and then go to planning and then courses, you can then plan your own routes and also view routes that other people have created and made public for everyone. Garmin uses Google Maps data, so the maps also show bike lanes and trails, but they also feature their own popularity heat map overlay, which is kind of cool. So the popularity heat map overlay, which are like the purple lines, shows the most popular areas to bike, run and hike, and are generated based on like aggregated user data, which is basically all the data collected from the public activities from everyone with Garmin watches doing like biking, running and hiking activities while tracking GPS. The popularity heat map is pretty useful for route planning because, for example, if you're planning to run in an unfamiliar area, you might feel a bit more secure knowing that you're running or cycling on streets, trails or just routes in general that have been used by many others. It might even introduce you to new routes that you didn't know existed. So on the map, the darker the purple lines are, the more popular the route is. But keep in mind a few things. Firstly, I'm not sure how new or fresh the data is or how often it's maintained. For example, it could be data from 2 years ago, or maybe even data that's only relevant for the past 3 days. I haven't really found out what it is. So there may be a popular route on the map, for example, but maybe it hasn't been used for a while because the bridge is broken and you'll only know once you're there in person. I don't even know what the minimum number of like activities are required before a route even has like the faintest popularity indicator line. And just because the line isn't there doesn't mean that the route isn't runnable. So again, it's mostly a recommendation rather than like a strict guideline, but still very handy nonetheless. So I've created a bunch of routes in the past using the route builder, which follows popular routes, and even like free-handed versions while loosely following the popular routes, but also applying some of my own knowledge of the area. I then loaded those routes onto my watch for like navigation, doing some of my long runs. Most of the time it turns out to be fairly accurate and the routes are quite runnable and good enough, but sometimes it's not, and yeah, it's fairly manageable, I guess. And then we have Strava. Similar to Garmin, Strava also provides a popularity heat map. They do make it a bit clearer regarding the parameters of the data, in that the heat map is updated monthly and uses public activities over the last 12 months, for example. On the mobile app, if you go to any activity and open the map, you can then go into the map settings and then enable the global heat map layer, and then you'll see these blue lines all over the map, and that kind of gives us an idea of where people tend to run. And sometimes I use this heat map over the Garmin heat map because at least I know it's updated monthly, so it has a bit more recent data. Segments are also a good way to see where people may run. You can find segments on the map section of the app and even see how many people have done that segment over the years. If you go to a segments leaderboard, you'll see activities that people have done that contain that segment. It might give you some ideas for your own routes as well. However, a lot of the heat map recap and route planning features on Strava are behind a subscription paywall, and I've never really been much of a subscriber on Strava. I might have gotten a 30-day trial in my early days, but yeah, I don't really do much of it. So I can't really plan or make my own routes on Strava as a non-subscriber, but I know many others have used it for their own route planning, and I assume it has some kind of like route building functionality similar to Garmin, where it uses the popularity heat maps to automatically plan routes as well. There's also a whole database of routes that others have created and made public as well, and that may give you some ideas for your own routes, and you can even like share your own routes as well. There's also Parkruns. Although I haven't visited that many Parkruns so far, I feel like it could be a good way to find out some like nice running locations around that area. Parkruns are often held at locations where lots of people can run while also being quite accessible as well, and it's likely to be part of like some nicer routes. For example, Rhodes Parkrun is in Bankstown Park, Wentworth Common Parkrun is in Wentworth Common, Parramatta Parkrun is along the Parramatta Valley Cycleway, Cooks River Parkrun is on a small section of the Cooks River Cycleway, Casula Parkrun runs along the Casula Parklands. I run across all these parkrun locations, doing long runs for example, and they're located on fairly nice routes in general. Sometimes you'll discover a route because of a parkrun around the area, other times it's the other way around. There's also running clubs and group runs. I haven't run with that many running clubs or groups so far, but I feel like it could also be a good way to explore some nice routes as well, especially if you're not too keen on like planning your own routes too much or like doing it alone and would rather just like chill out and be a bit more social, or even just explore a route with someone else. It might depend on the running club or the group and what they plan on doing, but I think generally there'll be someone guiding or leading the way on a route that they're familiar with. Sometimes they may venture onto unfamiliar routes, but at least it'll be done in a group setting. Anyways, there's a few considerations I like to point out when it comes to planning your routes. Firstly, there's safety. Even with all the popularity heat map data that we have and knowing where runners prefer or tend to run, sometimes we don't know if an area or route is particularly safe for running. So if you're planning to go to an unfamiliar route in a suburb that you've never been to, for example, you should make sure that someone close to you knows where you're going, and also stay alert throughout. Not really on guard entirely, but more around just being aware of your surroundings, and even try to go with someone else or like group as well. I'd say definitely bring a phone with you just in case you need to make a call as well. I've also run into like some undesirable routes with like antisocial confrontations and even like off-leash aggressive dogs, for example, but it's not like you can always plan for that entirely because it can happen anywhere really. So I just make note of it if that ever happens and avoid those kind of routes moving forward. I try not to run around streets or neighborhoods too much, since cars can like come in and out driveways, and if we really had to, they'll stick to like more popular and wider streets with like more visibility. Generally I find shared footpaths and cycleways and most parks to be fairly safe as long as it's fairly popular and has like high visibility or like just open space in general. And at the best time to explore route is probably like early Sunday morning where it's like more quiet and all, but keep in mind it might be a different experience if you go during like peak or like more popular hours, or even like in the evening and darker hours as well. Another thing is that you probably shouldn't expect to run fast on like unfamiliar routes, or even like on most urban streets either. So maybe don't plan an interval session or like a goal marathon pace long run on like a local street with like lots of driveways. See if you're able to find extended uninterrupted sections for those kind of runs, whether that's like a cycleway or shared footpath, a park, a reserve, an athletics track, or even like the treadmill of anything. Another consideration is also the amenities. Oftentimes it's not easy to find out whether a route has like toilets or like water fountains, for example. If you're going on a group run, chances are someone there will probably know the key locations. If you're going alone, you might need to prepare ahead, like bring water with you, or even be ready to find some bushes. I'm not saying you should, but if you gotta go, right? But just be really aware of your surroundings. Sometimes you might have to like bail midway on a route, and that could mean having to take like a bus or a train back, making a call, or even like visiting the shops for a bit. So it's probably a good idea to carry your phone with you. Finally, the other thing I want to point out is that we don't always have immediate access to like nice routes running. It kind of depends where we live, and while some suburbs are great for it, others aren't. Sometimes you have to go a bit further from your immediate area to make things work, hopefully within jogging distance, a short drive, or like a little short cycle to get there. And that was kind of the case for me, living in Bankstown and then discovering Riverwood, which is about 50 minutes jog away from my place and has become pretty much a staple location for my running these days. Other times it might mean you have to like drive or take the bus or train to a certain location, and there's no shame in that. Those are some of the ways that I've discovered and planned my running routes, and also some other considerations as well. As I ran more and got fitter over time, I felt more confident and comfortable going further and trying new routes, but there's often times where it's been a bit reckless as well, so honestly it might not be for everyone. You don't have to do long runs across multiple suburbs like I tend to do, for example, but if you're curious to find out some nicer routes around your area, or even like further out, there's a bunch of ways for that, and you might even be surprised at what you stumble upon. Personally, there's always going to be some exploring involved in my running journey, whether it's alone or with others, mostly because it keeps things interesting and fun. Anyways, I hope this has been helpful in some kind of way. Feel free to let me know how you guys discover and plan your running routes. Other than that, thanks for watching and have a nice day. Bye!